Humza Yousaf, the Scottish First Minister from the SNP, resigned earlier today, saying his position was untenable. He was about to lose a confidence vote. Delighted to be joined now on Drive, Party Chairman of the Scottish Conservatives, Craig Hoy, MSP. Craig, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Jeremy.
Lovely to have you on Drive. Let's get the Conservative response. You were behind this vote of no confidence. Peter Carbell, our chief political commentator here. A seminal moment for politics in Scotland, my friend.
Well, it is. I mean, Humza Yousaf has been an abject failure since he came to office just over 12 months ago. And when he booted out the Greens last week from government, we welcomed that fact because they've been doing real damage. But he badly managed the process. He had to call them the very next day and ask them to support him in our motion of no confidence that we brought against him. And the maths simply didn't add up for the First Minister. So we brought that motion of no confidence against him. It was quite clear he was going to lose this week, so he jumped today before he was pushed.
How sure, Craig, it's Peter Cardwell here. I just wondered how sure you were that, or when you thought he'd kind of get through to in this week, and also whether you think whether it's John Swinney, whether it's Kate Forbes or whoever takes over as leader of the SNP in the Scottish Parliament and First Minister as well, who are they going to work with? Can they get the Greens back on board? Is that something that you actually think is a desirable outcome, or do you want an election for the Scottish Parliament? What do you want to happen?
Well, we definitely wouldn't want to see the Greens back in government again. They were the architects of some of the most ludicrous and dangerous legislation that the Scottish Government was pursuing. For example, I heard you, Jeremy, earlier referring to Isla Bryson and the gender recognition reforms that quite rightly were struck down by the UK Government and the UK courts because they were deeply damaging to women and women's safe spaces. So those were the sorts of policies that the SNP and Green coalition were pursuing. So we will not mourn the passing of the Greens in government, and I think it's entirely right and proper that Humza Yousaf leaves office because he's been an absolute disaster as First Minister. I mean, his time in office has been characterised by one policy failure after another, by a whole series of U-turns, and by a number of scandals that he made far worse by the way he managed them. So he was going to lose in that Conservative motion of no confidence against him this week. But also we should bear in mind that whoever follows will still want to pursue the independence obsession of the SNP. They're a one-trick pony. That is their single issue. I mean, Humza Yousaf had said that when the general election comes round, it was page 1, line 1 of his manifesto would have been about independence, not about schools.
Craig, is that dream dead? The SNP, I mean, I made a point earlier, I love your take on it. If I was living in Scotland and I believed in independence and I paid my party membership, when I saw, I mean, you know, it was, what was it, 2 years ago, Pete, maybe 18 months ago, Nicola Sturgeon and Peter Murrell were the two most powerful people in Scottish politics.
Less than a year ago. Yeah,
less than a year ago. One's now been charged by the police, the other is, well, in shame, I would imagine, and the heir apparent is finished. So you sort of look at it and go, is that the end of the independence stream? Alex Salmon, who's on later, will say absolutely not. Alba will take up, you know, the task. But for the Scottish Conservatives, is it dead? I mean, does this strengthen the unionist argument?
No, sadly, independence isn't dead. I mean, you knock on doors. I was knocking on doors at the weekend, and you still find people who want to vote for the SNP because, you know, they're dyed-in-the-wool nationalists. But fundamentally, in Scotland, the majority of the population now, I think, want to move on from the division of the past. Scotland voted in a referendum 14 years ago, in 2014, and it was quite clear then that the majority of people wanted to remain in the UK. But the SNP under Nicola Sturgeon and Humza Yousaf have continued to bang the drum for independence. So it hasn't gone away. They're down, but they're not out. But that's why our next attack on them will come at the general election, where in seats right across Scotland, from the northeast to the southwest, there are many seats where it's a straight fight between the Scottish Conservatives and the SNP, where Labour don't feature, the Liberal Democrats.
Sorry, Craig, I just want to jump in because your challenge as the party chairman of the Scottish Tories, let's not lie about this. The Tory government in this country is so behind the eight ball, they might as well still be at home. Now, there's been a few things this week and over the last couple of weeks, and people are saying, you know, is this the big reset? Is Rishi Sunak making a fight? But what do you need to do in Scotland? There's this vacuum, isn't there? The SNP is on its backside. In that vacuum, what do you, as the party chairman, Craig Hoy, need to get the Conservatives in Scotland to prove to the voters?
Well, we need to prove that we can win in those seats where it's a straight fight between ourselves and the SNP. And just last Thursday, Jeremy, in Arbroath, we had a council by-election where our vote was up 10% and the SNP vote was down 7%. So where it's a binary choice between the Conservatives and the SNP, we can do very well. And there are a number of seats in Scotland where we presently hold 6, but where we expect to make some modest gains in Scotland as well, because voters are heartily sick and tired of the SNP, and we have to point out to them that it's only we as the Scottish Conservatives that can win in those seats, and we're working very hard to do that.
Craig, do you honestly think you're going to make gains in the general election? Honestly, because we're in a situation where the real story in Scotland surely is Labour. We're in a situation where Labour is ahead of the SNP in the polls for the first time since 2014. They will do, if the polls are to be believed, far better in this election, and actually perhaps even that majority that Keir Starmer so dearly wants may come from Scottish Labour MPs. You're talking about straight fights with the SNP, but the real story is Labour here, isn't it?
There are seats where it will be a straight fight between Labour and the SNP in the Central Belt. I'm not denying there are those contests, but where we're in contention against the SNP, we're explaining very hard to voters that if they want to get rid of the SNP, if they want to deal Humza Yousaf and his party, he's on the way out now, but if they want to deal with the SNP a bloody nose in the general election, then vote Scottish Conservative. And that result in Arbroath last week is the 4th or 5th by-election in a run here in Scotland where we've beaten the SNP in a head-to-head. So it would be to mischaracterise Scottish politics in the context of it's just Labour versus the SNP. There are seats right across Scotland, as I say, from the north east to the south west, where we're fighting them hard, and we'll be pointing out that if you want to defeat the SNP, you have to vote Scottish Conservative, and that message is getting through to voters.
I'll leave it to you, Craig Coy, Party Chairman of the Scottish Conservatives. What's Humza Yousaf's legacy?
I think there is not much of a legacy there to stand on. He's the man who couldn't ride a scooter, he couldn't run a country. He got found out very early on in his first ministership. He backed Michael Matheson, the Health Secretary, who ran up an £11,000 roaming charges bill whilst watching football, or his family allegedly were watching football in far-flung Morocco. He tried to load that onto the taxpayer, and Humza Yousaf defended him all the way through the winter. That goes to show how misplaced Humza Yousaf's priorities are. Meanwhile, Scotland's schools, hospitals, roads, railways, those lifeline ferries are still getting worse for people across Scotland. He's been an abject failure. I'm glad to see he's gone, and I just hope now that we can get the focus back on to the Scottish people's real priorities, and that's what I'm doing as Scottish Conservative Party Chairman, and that's what Douglas Ross is doing as the leader of the party here in Scotland.
It's good to have you on, Craig. Thank you so much indeed. Craig Hoy, member of the Scottish Parliament, Pete, and Party Chairman.